Good evening, Des Moines. Welcome to the Doc and Lefty program here on webcast1live.com. It is Tuesday, so we are coming at you live from the swelteringly hot studios in downtown Des Moines, bringing you the perspectives you love from the sides you hate. With me, as always, is my partner in crime. I say Ben, he says Ghazi, Pat Bertroche. Pat, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. You know, I just now noticed that my mic is a little low. I've been having that problem lately.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, I've been doing good. I'm glad the weather's starting to get hot. The only problem is you know, when it goes from cold to hot, we don't get much of a spring.
It's true. You know, we were having a pretty normal spring. I've lived in Iowa now for, I don't know, 27 years or so. I moved here when I was 5 or 6, I think. And
from the frozen tundra of South Dakota.
That's right. Frozen in the winter, blasted, scorching brown hot in the summer. Windy, you can't even touch it in South Dakota. But so I remember springs a lot like the one that we were having here in early May, where it was cloudy, it rained a lot, and we've been having except for the few thunderstorms and tornado warnings that we've had, which is it's the season for it, folks. We've had fairly kind of long soaking rains that I think the farmers have got to be pretty pleased with. They can't be super happy with it with a 65-degree day being followed up by an 84-degree day, especially when they're trying to get their seeds in the ground.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, even if you have good weather all week, the ground may still be wet. I mean, we had some pretty torrential rains last week. The ground still may not be suitable to go out and plow.
Yep.
So, you know, these farmers really, you know, on times like this, it really kind of can hose them over, so to speak. And speaking of getting hosed over, we're going to talk a little bit about Ukraine and the impact that its elections are going to have.
You know, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about the Ukraine thing and just how it feels like this slow descent into just complete and total chaos, where even though it's been chaotic before, but with relative calm in between the periods. And maybe we'll get into it in a little more detail, but the whole new referendum in Donetsk, what does this say? Does this say that the Russians don't have as much control over the folks they sent there as they thought they did? I mean, Putin didn't want it to happen. NATO didn't want it to happen. The Ukrainians didn't want it to happen. Nobody wanted it to happen. In fact, all sides of the issue said, don't do the referendum. We're not going to acknowledge it. It's illegal and it's stupid. And they went and did it anyway. What does that say to you?
Well, there's a couple of things in there where I don't think you're correct. I agree that the NATO and the Ukrainians don't want it. However, Putin does want it.
He came out and said to delay it.
Yeah,
don't do it because it's not.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that he's really saying, geez, don't do it. There's a difference when you're dealing with the Russians. What they say is completely different than what they mean. All right. They don't, what they want is destabilization of Ukraine. And if you look at the meeting that they just had with Merkel and Putin said, well, yeah, we won't invade Ukraine now, but
he's not sending any troops to protect Russian speakers.
No, he's not. But he is still calling for the exact same tenets he called for before he invaded Crimea, the federalization of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And what he's basically saying is, we have our boys there, and I'm going to ask them not to. But his entire thing the entire time has been, well, I'm not doing this. These are people that are spontaneously assaulting everything everywhere, even though they have Russian-made equipment and Russian-made accents and Russian-made everything.
Uniforms without patches.
Yes.
Yep.
I'm not the one that ordered this. I don't have anything to do with it. They are spontaneously protesting just like the people that are pro-Western spontaneously protested. That's his position.
Well,
so he has to say stuff like, oh, please don't have this referendum. The problem is in the Crimean vote, all right? Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about that last week. It's the same thing this week. Yep. 100% of the districts reported in. 100% of the people voted. Well, 100% of the people didn't vote.
Nope.
When you start looking at the Ukrainian makeup of these areas, when you start talking about who's ethnically Russian and who isn't, ethnic Russians make up 30% of the population there. That's a large percentage.
Yes,
but it's not 100%.
Well, the anti-referendum folks didn't go out and vote no. They were afraid. They weren't going anywhere.
Well, and the other thing is just today in the Kiev Post, the pro-Russian people busted into the voting stations and took stole the voting papers that they have. They have chads like they do down in Florida. Ukrainians can figure out how to use chads, just people not in Florida. So anyway, they stole all these, and they also blocked a lot of the voting areas and stations, and with weapons. They were armed. I mean, this is even worse than the Black Panthers and what they do every election. So, the bottom line is these people are going to be staying home. It's not 100% of the people are voting, but they're going to count 100% of the votes. Well, there's a difference. And the difference is these people are getting shafted and getting hosed. And even the leaders, if you listen carefully to what the leaders say, they'll talk about, we want to join Russia.
Yep.
But at the same time, they say, we don't want Russian troops to come into Ukraine.
Well, the people, even the pro-referendum folks, if you heard reports on the BBC, they were saying, sure, we want to govern ourselves, or we want more say in what's going on in Kiev because we don't recognize the legitimacy in that government. And even the most pro-Ukrainian folks do acknowledge that there's an argument that the government in Kiev needs to be dealt with in a more democratic way. It came to power kind of sketchily, even if there was a lot up in the air. I'm not going out. I'm not an expert. I'm not saying it's illegitimate.
Yeah.
I'm saying there are serious questions that they have conveniently left aside while they're dealing with the rebellion in the East.
Well, and that's absolutely true. We've argued about this before. In fact, I argue a lot with my friends that are familiar with this. Mm-hmm. But you have to keep in mind that when Yanukovych came to power, the UN said it was the most corrupt vote that it had overseen in a decade.
The first time,
not
the second time. I thought the second time.
Yanukovych was only elected once.
No, because
you're talking about the very first time he was elected.
The revolution, the orange revolution,
that
whatever,
was
mauve,
the orange
magenta.
revolution. Yes, it was orange.
It was okay. Good.
Not magenta. Who has a magenta revolution?
Hey, I don't know. Some of those.
Oh my goodness!
Some of those
Speaking of magenta, very nice shirt.
You like that?
Yeah, I do. It's very pretty.
Some of those hippies in Liechtenstein would probably have a
magenta
revolution. I can't remember what color it is.
But it was the Orange Revolution, and it was against Yanukovych for exactly the same things he did the second time around. And so then they had the Orange Revolution. That really worked fairly well until the market collapsed, the worldwide collapse in 2008.
Well, then they jailed Timoshenko and the whole thing.
Yeah, and then Yanukovych came to power. That's the one where UN said it was one of the most corrupt elections that they'd seen in a decade, and she barely lost, and there was estimates that up to 40% of the votes tallied were fraudulent, and so one, it doesn't lend him much legitimacy, and then he immediately starts to decrease all the democratic powers of their constitution from 2004, and then he flees an intact capital. Now, historically, what that means is he's already given up his power. When you flee an intact capital, which is what he did, that means you have abdicated whatever position you're in, and it's one of these old military tradition things.
Yeah, that's not recognized in a democracy, though. I mean, you can't. The whole
but
point.
But it is recognized in international law.
I don't know about. I couldn't comment one way or the other on that, but. I mean, you don't just, when you're elected for a term of years by whatever body elected you, you can resign, but he didn't resign. He didn't resign his post; he just left.
Well,
and I think
he fled his capital.
That's different, and it's not this.
We'll look it up over the break. We're going to be right back after the break. We want to thank everybody for tuning in. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter, Facebook. It's Doc and Lefty. And Twitter is Doc and Lefty, docandlefty.com. I have blogs up. Blake has been a lazy bum.
I'm working on it.
So we'll be back right after the break. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
On the whole, I think Washington, D.C. is a terrible place. It's hot, it's humid, kind of smells, and it's totally lacking individuals who know how to create jobs and live within their means. Hi, I'm Brad Zahn, and I approve this message. And I'm running for Congress because we owe it to future Iowans to fix the mess that was created in Washington, D.C. I've had real experience creating jobs, cutting taxes, and balancing budgets while mayor and in the state senate. If you trust me to represent you, I promise I'll go to Washington, D.C. and do the right thing, and come home every Sunday to spend time with my wife, my kids, and my neighbors here in Iowa. We cannot leave this country in worse shape than we found it. I will not pass this debt on to my children or yours. I will go to Washington, D.C. and tell them enough is enough. Standing together is the only way we're going to get Washington, D.C. to listen, and I hope you'll join me in this fight.
Brad Zahn for United States Congress.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in this evening. Remember that our shows are live streamed right now between 6:30 and 7:30 on Tuesdays, and then shortly after, they will be posted to YouTube. We've got a YouTube channel. I believe it's just Doc and Lefty, the YouTube/Doc and Lefty. I believe that's what the call sign is. So check us out on that if you don't have time to sit here and listen to us for an hour. Leave comments on the things that you like and the things that you hate, because we certainly think that there's probably enough hate to go around. But we're talking about the developments in Ukraine right now, and it's this mess that just kind of is. It's kind of like an oil slick right now. It doesn't have the utter complete humanitarian devastation or atrocities that you see in a place like Syria, but nothing is happening. It's getting worse. And we were talking a little bit about the way that the I don't even know who is even the acting prime minister right now. They're having elections coming up, but I think it's just an interim government came to power. And my point was not. I think that the jury is out among international observers. And certainly, the United States views the government in Kiev as a government they can work with, not necessarily as an illegitimate government, like for example, in Egypt, where we refused to label a coup, what was clearly a coup, as a coup, so that we could maintain that relationship, and they didn't violate the international treaties that they're signatories to. We could keep sending aid over there. That's really not how we're treating this in Ukraine necessarily. It's more of a revolution, I think, the way that we had it a few years ago, but I personally believe that there are legitimate questions that can be asked about how the Western Ukraine is kind of dealing with these uprisings around the country and Crimea.
Well, there were several. Well, they tried to respond militarily. The Ukrainians were clear. Listen, they're going to have to start giving these things up. So they made it very clear that they're going to go in. And the problem is when you make it very clear where you're going to attack and what you're going to do, it makes it easy for the other side to dig in, and that's what they've done. Number two, Yanukovych systematically dismantled the Ukrainian military, period, right? And three, we're talking about Russians, and I don't care what you think about the Russians. Those are some tough SOBs, right? So you have the Ukrainians going up against the Russians with superior firepower and superior military training. So they're not going to do very well. This weekend there were several clashes, and several people were killed in these outbursts. So I don't think that these referendums are going to be binding. Like as you said, right. Russia said we're not going to enforce these. Or the other thing is these. Ukraine says we're not going to enforce them, and we're going to hold elections just in 5 days.
Right.
And that's what's going to determine where we go.
Well, don't you think that the calculation for Vladimir Putin, which once again goes to the points that I've made on this show and in various things I've written, is that he's a reactionary. This is not a guy that's looking at prospective moves here. I think certainly destabilizing Ukraine serves the Russian interest to a certain degree. However, he's not rolling tanks into eastern Ukraine because he's afraid that will finally get the Europeans off their rear ends and say, okay, now we finally have to do something. Now we're finally going to go in. And he doesn't want to pick a fight with NATO wholesale.
Well, and that's true. And the truth of the matter is he doesn't have to fear Europe, the old Europe. He has to fear new Europe. And he has to fear the Poles. Because you want to talk about some really top-notch military guys, that's them. And the Poles have quietly said if Ukraine's borders are violated any further, that they will respond with all options on the table. And that's very clear signal that they're going to be the ones to go.
And the shame that from a guy that wants to see that avoided at all costs. If Poland goes in and we don't, I believe that we're in violation of the NATO treaty.
Well, now we've talked about that on a previous.
We'd have to go in, wouldn't we? Am I wrong about that?
No, because if they go in, we don't have to go with them. If they get attacked, then we have to respond.
Okay,
that's how that works. So anyway, these elections coming up. There's a guy named Poroshenko, because all Ukrainians' last name is Shenko somewhere, right? So your Poroshenko is the chocolate king over there. I mean, he's got all kinds of chocolates, and don't get me wrong, they're not like Cadbury chocolates, but they're pretty good. And he leads Vitaly Klitschko, the boxer, through his support behind him. And it looks like at this point, at least 54% of the population would vote for him if the election was held today. Tymoshenko is coming in at 10%. And what she's hoping to do is have at least part of a coalition together so that when Poroshenko is elected, she gets to be prime minister or hold some other position. But when you're looking at things, Poroshenko is one of the oligarchs of Ukraine. He's the Ukraine's richest man, and the bottom line is he will probably win at least the first round of elections. After that, it will be interesting to see who he appoints where. It may be that Vitaly Klitschko, because he had run for mayor of Kiev. Maybe that Vitaly Klitschko gets appointed as a cabinet post, which would solidify him. And then basically what Poroshenko has said is that he's going to start signing the agreements with the West. Number 2, that he's going to really push again for NATO involvement. 3, get rid of the visa system that they have in Ukraine that restricts their movement. And those are the 3 things that are popular. Social issues. He's not going to support gay marriage. He is against that. He is going to start looking at ways to strengthen the family and do away with abortion. So that should make some of the right-wingers over there happy. And he's also going to start revamping land ownership. And I think that's a good step. Now, what does this mean for Europe? Not a lot. What this means is if they get a stable government in Kiev that leans their way, that's better than having an unstable government, and it's better than having a government that leans towards Russia.
Well, and Europe is really, I mean, if you're gonna assign responsibility, Europe really dropped the ball on this whole thing. If Europe had been strong and decisive right from the very beginning, I got to think that Vladimir Putin really rethinks his options, and they didn't.
Well, no, and nobody. Well, you can throw the U.S. in there. I mean, that's typical for our U.S. response under Obama.
No, that's not true. That's complete.
It is true.
No, it's
I mean,
not. The U.S. had had a specific set and package of sanctions with a specific way that they were going about implementing them, which they did. They were clear and decisive in that regard, and they couldn't get Europe to go along with them. So that you can't blame the United States.
Well, you're right, but we're talking about 2 different things. One, you're going to have sanctions on Russia, where that we don't depend on them; the Europeans do. And 2, sanctions aren't going to get Putin to back off. He could care less. It doesn't affect him. It doesn't affect any of the oligarchs. It just affects the poor people of Russia is what it affects. So, the conversation about whether sanctions work or not can be saved for a different time. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, I guess I do agree with you. If Europe had been more responsive, if they had responded to Russia like they responded to Libya, that's a good point. And I also sort of think in this particular situation, now we don't need to go off on a whole tangent about American power and leading and whatever, because that's not the point I'm trying to make. But I think in this specific situation, Russia, Ukraine, Europe, the NATO alliance, you really needed Germany, I think, because she's the only one Angela Merkel is the only person whose phone call Vladimir Putin will take. He's not listening to anybody else. He's not talking to anybody else. She's the only one with any insight into what he's thinking right now, because she's the only one he's talking to about any of this stuff. You needed Germany to step up and say, we're going to lead the charge in stabilizing the situation, and they refuse to do it. Well, because they don't. Well, like we've talked about before, if they lose their energy and lose their ability to produce, just like they did when they shut off they had a brownout a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. Germany is the one that loses. And in fact, I've talked about this before. Germany has finally done what it's always wanted to do, and that is have absolute control over Europe. Well, they're the de facto leader. The only people that are a thorn in their side are the English, because they haven't actually joined the European Union.
The Eurozone anyway. The
Eurozone. I should say
currency.
That.
Yeah.
Yes, and you're right. So we want to thank. Well, let's take a quick break. I want to thank all of our sponsors for tuning in. Des Moines Anesthesia PC. They're out there floating around. I don't know if they have a website. Actually, is a problem. Well, we've been looking, so I don't know where it is. But at one point I found it. So it's Des Moines Anesthesia PC. Their number's right there, 263-5316. Of course, Petrosian Associates, Lubinas Law Firm, Halo Capital, along with Brad Zahn. We'll bring this up a little bit later, but Brad, we have a very interesting poll from Loras College.
Yeah. I saw that.
So anyway, well, I think we'll probably switch topics a little bit. I mean, because it's interesting how it's going to play out. It's really interesting to watch over there in Ukraine. But Senator Jack Hatch on Monday was given a ticket for, I believe, going 68 in a 55 zone in that speed trap over in Altoona. And if you're even familiar with the area, you know what speed trap it was.
Yes.
And so he took the opportunity to say he's sorry, he's responsible, he's not going to try to get out of it, and that he believes in personal responsibility, unlike our current governor, Branstad, who he took a big old swipe at Branstad, who
why not?
Has had his own problems with the law stemming from his first administration here in Iowa. So, what do you think of that? What do you think? Do you think he can make any kind of hay with this accusation?
Well, yes, but not substantively. I mean, it's a fun talking point, and it'll remind people, because no one really took notice of the whole Terry Branstad speeding thing in statewide, really, when it happened. I know that Ed Fallon did. Ed Fallon, who's got a show right on before us here on Webcast One Live. Certainly, I remember at the time was hammering Governor Branstad and the administration about this day after day after day. I don't know if you heard some of those shows, but he was on it right from the beginning. But it didn't really register statewide until the trooper that pulled the convoy over, the Suburban over, was fired. And anytime, whether it's for a legitimate reason or not, whenever something like that happens, when it's essentially your boss, you have, in the exercise of your due authority under the laws of this state, pulled somebody over for speeding. He was going really, really fast up there on, I think, Highway 20, headed towards Waterloo and Cedar Falls, which is a 65 and a 4-lane, and I think they were going upwards of close to 90 miles an hour, really with no good reason. I don't think that Branstad's ever come out and said, well, holy cow, we had to get there, and there was this emergency or that emergency or whatever. But the guy gets fired, and that just perception becomes reality. And that's really what held on to people, like, oh my gosh, so this 5-term Iowa governor is going to get this guy canned for doing his job. That's not fair. That's not right. And I don't know that that's necessarily enough to sway the election one way or the other, that issue in a nutshell. But it certainly is something that, quote unquote, common sense Iowans are going to frown on. Jack Hatch swiping at him, I think, is just so much political posturing. And I think that if the roles were reversed, Branstad would do the same thing.
Well, and I would agree with that as well. My issue is
makes you chuckle though a little bit.
It does, and the bottom line is when you're traveling the state as a campaign person, you do your best to try to group what you're going to do. But I can tell you, there's going to be something in Decorah, Iowa that they have to go to. Then there's going to be something down in Ottumwa they have to go to, or they have to go from Bettendorf to Council Bluffs, and you just sit there, you put your foot on the gas. It's not like he was going 80 or 90; he was going 68, which is, if he's out there on the speed limit 70 miles an hour,
yep.
He's actually not going the speed limit.
Well, in that speed trap by Altoona, that's because of road construction that's basically done. They've had that 55 out there for so long that no one really remembers why it's never. I think it's supposed to be 65.
Yes, I believe you're right, but You know,
Oh, no,
it's a cash cow.
Hey, he
It's a
broke
cash cow.
he broke the law in that regard, paid the ticket, taken responsibility. Who cares, right?
Yeah.
It's just, but it is kind of one of those sort of funny opportunities that he has, and you know his campaign staff was saying we can take a big old swipe. It's not. I don't think it's going to resonate electorally, but
Well, do you think
reminds
Jack
people of it.
If you think Jack Hatch was governor, do you think this guy would be fired?
oh, the guy that pulled him over.
Yeah.
I don't know. Here's this is my dime store analysis of these two guys. I don't know either Branstad or Jack Hatch personally, so I'm not going to make any personal assumptions about their character. I've met the governor several times, both at official functions and when I was a bartender at Des Moines Golf and Country Club. I know his son Eric and and Eric's family much better than I know the governor. And when I heard that the trooper got fired, it didn't surprise me. Not because I think that Terry Branstad is a vindictive person, and or that he would even think about revenge in that way. It just, I feel like this isn't he runs a ship that is, there's no opposition in his ship. Jack Hatch, I don't know. I think it would surprise me a little bit more if he did something like that because, and correct me if I'm wrong, he has a much more kind of populist reputation around the state, and I think that would that would damage his brand a lot more so if the simple trooper gets fired for pulling him over. I don't want to cast aspersions either way because who knows. Power goes to people's heads in weird ways.
Oh yeah, you bet. And the thing is it's bad form. And we talked about this last year. It's bad form for a politician to get out of a ticket. And I remember
you just can't do it.
Well, when I was working for Senator Jepsen, that was the beginning of the end for him, and he didn't realize it at the time. But he got pulled over in D.C., used his privilege of going to a vote to get out of it. And that was the only opening the Harkin had. And he banged on that opening and banged on it and banged on it.
Lost touch.
And was unrelenting until, of course, they found out that Jepsen visited a couple of whorehouses here in Des Moines. And then that really sunk him. So, if he hadn't been vulnerable because of that ticket, I doubt they would have found out his extracurricular activities. So, anyway, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, we're going to be back right after the break. I want to thank all of our sponsors for tuning in. That was a great shot of you.
Hey, I liked
that.
it.
That was beautiful.
I've got a Rubenesque figure. That's not positive.
Yeah.
No one should think that's a compliment.
All right.
It sounds pretty.
Oh yes. Well, speaking of pretty, did you notice Frank got a new facial cut in there?
Nope. I haven't even talked to him.
Oh yeah, that's right. So anyway, we'll be back right after the break. You listen to Doc and Lefty on webcast1live.com every Tuesday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and don't forget to visit docandlefty.com. We'll be back right after the break.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Get away from us, you mean old credit card. We don't have any more money. We're in trouble now. Save us! Help! Somebody save us! Somebody help! Help! Save us!
Hi, I'm Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of Des Moines. If your credit card's a little too animated, give us a call.
Hooray! We're saved! Consumer Credit! You're our hero!
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking around with us for the second half hour. As we have been doing every week for the last few weeks, we're going to give you a quick update on the third judicial, gosh, you can tell where my head's at. The third congressional district race here in Polk County and All Points Southwest. The Republican field, because there are more things going on, is more interesting to talk about. We were talking over the break that and maybe Doc, you look this up for me. We had been mentioning that Stacey Apple on the Democratic side had a Democratic challenger for the nomination, and I just don't know if that's actually true. I'm not so certain that she's being primaried, that there's a primary going on, because the only reports that you ever hear and the only things you ever see in the paper are about the Republican primary. The vote, I think, is June 3rd. So if I'm wrong about that, please call in and correct me.
No, it's June 3rd primary.
Well, no, about Stacey Apple, because I was listening to some of the updates that IPR is talking about, and just kind of handicapping the race a little bit, and she was the only Democratic candidate they talked about. And they were on the Republican side. They even discussed Joe Grandinette. No, I'm not trying to throw Joe under the bus. He's been on this show, and we certainly enjoyed having him. But he's polling in the single digits. And certainly, if there was another challenger on the Democratic side to Stacey Apple, they would be talking about that person too.
Yeah, and I would agree.
So, but anyway, you had a poll that you want to talk about.
Now a couple of things. We had Joe on the show, and of course, I'm a big fan of Joe. I think he's a good guy. I've known him for years. He helped on my campaign. And what I think is amazing is, one, the signage that he has up are the prime spots everybody else wants. Really. So this guy does know everybody. I mean, he's got signs on the south side. He's got signs on the west side on prominent streets. What is also astonishing is you have Robert Kramer, who is Robert Kramer and David Young. Between the two of them, I believe they've raised close to $600,000 between the two of them. They have spent $500,000 in advertising, and they're not much further ahead than Joe Grandinette, who hasn't spent anything outside of a couple of billboards, and not even a billboard, just paint and spray, right? And here these guys are spending $500,000 not going anywhere. There's Matt Schultz, and I believe at this point he's raised close to $400,000. He hasn't closed the gap at all with Brad Zahn. Now, the last time we talked a little bit about the polling, 70% of people were still undecided, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. Now it's just a little bit less than 50% are undecided. Brad Zahn still holds a commanding lead, at least 9 points over Matt Schultz. And of course, the rest of the field is back there. You have Kramer, you have Young. Even though Kramer and Young both have very effective campaign ads out there, they haven't influenced or swayed anybody. And within that pack, within statistical insignificance, is Joe Grandinette. Now, I don't mean statistical insignificance that he's insignificant, but the differences between those three candidates is minuscule.
Right.
I mean, and so I sit there and I look at this and I go, this is amazing. Here is Joe, who declared he was going to run against Tom Latham, got all of his papers together, then Tom Latham retires. Well, there is Joe saying, I gave my word, I'm going to run, and there he is getting more traction than the other two candidates, spending $500,000. And then there's Matt Schultz, who has effectively, I think, terminated his election chances with this problem with Jim Givens and other employees that he just let stay on the dole. It's bad when you have the Republican auditor, Mary Mosman, who's been on the show, and we both met her, and she's a great gal, step in and say, yeah, I think we're going to audit that. We're going to figure out what's going on, especially 3 weeks in front of the primary. The primary is June 3rd. So these guys have 2 weeks to separate themselves from the pack, and they haven't. The problem is with this study is Brad Zahn. What it shows is Brad Zahn still has a commanding lead, but he hasn't absolutely wiped out his competition. They still are within striking distance. At least Matt Schultz is. The other problem is Matt Schultz had been surging a little bit, and with this scandal, it's dropped off. So now you have people where they were voting for Matt Schultz now back in the I don't know pool. And then, of course, you have Kramer and Young, who have their people that support them and that haven't made up any ground whatsoever. They haven't pulled away from Joe Grandinette, and Joe's a realist. He'll tell you, yeah, I might be running last, but I'm not spending $500,000 either. So there's Joe. Actually, Shaban's running last, isn't he? So Shaban, I don't even know. I don't even think they listed him as having even a percent. But there's Joe at 3%, and there's Young and Kramer at somewhere around 4 to 5%. And you're like, geez, here's Joe spending maybe $600 in paint, doing just as well as those guys spending $500,000. I believe that is real testimony to not only the voters of Iowa in general, but to the 3rd District specifically, that they can smell BS when they smell it, because here are these two. David Young's not a carpetbagger, and that's not my phrase I'm going to use to describe him, but he has been described by several prominent Republicans as a carpetbagger. Well, that's tough to overcome. And there's Robert Kramer, who, great, I'm glad he's out there running, but he has his multi-million-dollar friends supporting him. And that smacks of oligarchy, right? And that's a big phrase since Ukraine blew up. So now you're down to, it's still basically a 2-horse race with Brad and Matt Schultz. Now, in fairness, I've invited all the candidates except for Shaban onto the show. I can't find out how to get a contact with them, but I'd have any of them on the show. Brad says he's willing to come on. He's come on. Joe said he'll come on. He's come on. Robert Kramer, haven't heard anything back from him. Haven't heard anything back from David Young. Haven't heard anything back from Matt Schultz. And of course, I don't know the Kramer and Young, but I know Grandinette. He showed up. I know Matt Schultz. He isn't. I know Brad Zahn. He shows up. Now, I'm going to tell you, I think that no matter what happens, we're going to have a good, solid conservative in the race. But I think that solid conservative is going to be Brad Zahn, especially since he is now really focused on trying to fundraise for the last 2 weeks.
Well, here, and I was looking at some of the numbers here, and Stacey Apple was going to run against Latham last year. She announced last year. She started working last year, and I'm looking at ballotpedia.org, and they've got her April 2014 quarterly numbers. Filed on April 15th, 2014. She's raised, in that reporting period, she raised $263,591. She's got a running total since she announced of $763,172. You compare that with Latham before he got out, who was like a little over 1.3, and then the reports on the Iowa Republican last month saying Brad Zahn hasn't raised anything. Why is Stacey Apple not getting more juice from the national party, especially a national party that should be interested in turning that seat back to the Democratic side?
We're going to that's an excellent question. We're going to get back to that right after the break. We want to thank all of our sponsors, Lubian's Law Firm, Bertrosian Associates, Halo Capital, Brad Zahn, and Des Moines Anesthesia PC. We're here every Tuesday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., discussing all the issues that are important to you as local Iowans, state Iowans, and national Iowans. How do you like that?
I do.
Great. So we'll be back right after the break. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Bertrosian Associates, how can I help you?
Bertrosian Associates will provide you with a friendly, caring, and confidential place to find help for mental health concerns. We are ready for your call. Our doctor, Dr. J. Patrick Bertrosh, provides a full range of psychiatric services for children, adolescents, and adults in a forthright and informative manner while maintaining a casual, comfortable, and relaxed atmosphere.
All across America, there are countless numbers of people struggling with addiction and other life-controlling issues. Probably someone you know and love. There is a way out. There is hope. Transformations Treatment Center in Delray Beach, Florida, has a unique approach to substance abuse treatment. Call now and ask about our Guaranteed Success program or log on to transformationstreatment.com. Transformations. Change your life. Change your relationships. Transform your world.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the 3rd District race here, and I posed a question to Doc right before the break about how whether or not the fundraising I believe it's a fundraising gap at this point between the frontrunners, Brad Zahn and Democratic opponent Stacey Apple, fairly wide. I mean, you can make those numbers up, but what that says about the race and what it says why the National Democratic Party doesn't seem to want to get involved at this point anyway.
Well, you hang out with lefties a lot more than I do. And so my thing is, and we've talked about this before, I mean, not on the show, but privately, we can get Republicans to come on the show. They're willing to come on the show. They're willing to talk. They're even willing to take your questions. They're willing to take my questions. I mean, Dr. Heap sat there for a half hour and let me abuse her over abortion issues. That takes a lot of guts. But lefties don't come on. They do a lot of social media stuff, a lot of soundbite stuff, things that really don't have a lot of substance. I mean, look at Bruce Braley's on my Facebook page. He'll come out there and say, fair work or fair wages for fair work. Well, terrific. But you're not really discussing the issues. You're just touting a sign. And the thing is this is kind of how they ran in 2010, 2012. If there's just one person from the Democratic side running, they just keep a low profile. Boswell kept a low profile until the last month that he ran. In fact, we called him the ghost candidate because you couldn't ever find the guy, ever. It's the same thing here.
It took Latham to beat him, though. That's what's so crazy, and I wonder
it did take Latham to beat him.
If that just doesn't mean that as much as the Iowa conservative talks about how they don't like the establishment, they don't like leadership, they don't like the same old, they cannot unify or they cannot get up behind somebody who hasn't been there before because they didn't rally around Brad Zahn in 2010. That's for sure. Yeah,
they stabbed. In my opinion, they stabbed Brad in the back.
But they got behind Latham.
They did. They got behind Latham.
And because, in my opinion, Latham has been there, and Latham is the guy that everybody knows. And so it just that suggests to me that the Republican Party in Iowa may just be poised to repeat another 2010, even when they have the momentum. They've got the off-year election. They've got all of the stuff that they can hammer on Stacey Apple with her record in the legislature. But even though Brad Zahn's a nice guy with decent name recognition, I don't know. It's just there's so many different facets of the Republican Party right now. I wonder if he's gonna have a hard time coalescing folks behind him.
And that was an issue. Now in 2010. We have what we politely refer to as the Incumbent Protection Plan. And the IPP states that if you have a known quantity that may be vulnerable to, gerrymandering like it was back in 2010, then what you do is you keep your incumbent and everybody else, can go suck eggs, basically. And don't get me wrong, it isn't just Republicans. The Democrats do it too. The problem is, here in Iowa, the Democrats are very well organized. Their leadership is unified, and they are marching forward. The problem is the Republicans here are not unified. That's obvious. You have Robert Kramer, who is a social and fiscal conservative. There he is, and a businessman. He's raising $300,000 from his business associates who really probably aren't all that socially conservative to begin with. You have David Young, and he's raised, I think, close to $100,000, something like that. And here he is, supposed to be a diehard conservative, but nobody trusts him, right? Which is strange because he gets up there, he doesn't want term limits, he doesn't want several other things that constitutional conservatives want. Then you have Matt Schultz, who's raising a ton of things, and I believe that he is the establishment golden boy. There's rumors that Robert Kramer was asked to run by Branstad, but those are just rumors. But here's Matt Schultz raising $250,000, $300,000. And, here he is, a social conservative. And the problem is people look at Matt and go, well, he's not that well known. He isn't that well known around here. So now you have Brad Zahn, who is a social conservative, who has proven his social conservative values, who is a maverick and has irritated a lot of the GOP establishment. Yet the one flaw that he has is that he can't raise money. He's the most genuine guy I've met, as far as a career politician. He says what he thinks, but people aren't going to get behind a maverick, especially the Republican Party, when he's saying, listen, I'm going to vote the way I think I ought to vote and not along party lines. That just sinks you every time. And add to that the confusion that we have in our leadership and the resentment that everybody has towards our leadership. You create quite a mess. Now, Stacey Apple, there's a lot of things wrong with her. She's managed to raise $750,000.
Yep.
Right? Something like that.
Without a whole lot of contribution from the National Party.
And the thing is the Republicans could do that too if they had just one candidate running. If they sat there and said, we're not going to support you running, right? Mm-hmm. And somehow, right? Do that however they could do it. Because, you add up all the money that all the candidates have raised, that comes close to that $750,000.
And I think it fundamentally comes down to the fact that that one of the key differences between the two parties, I'm sure you're going to kick and scream when I make this argument, is that you can disagree with what the actual messages are, but the Democrats since 2008 and actually since 2006 really have had a consistent, coherent set of policy proposals that they have been relentlessly pushing for almost 10 years at this point. And the Republican Party, with the disaster that the last year and a half, 2 years of the Bush administration was, been out in the wilderness that much, with the Tea Party coming in and kind of really kicking up the dust in 2010, have no set coherent, I'm not talking about values here, I'm talking about policy proposals, no coherent set of policy proposals that the American people can look at and compare one to one the way the Democrats have. You can disagree with what the Democrats are trying to do, but you win elections by presenting things to the American public and making your argument, not
making it clear.
Right, making a clear argument. That's exactly right. Not by kicking and screaming at the Democrats, at each other, at the media, at whatever kind of new boogeyman you want to throw up there, but then not have anything to offer. Well, and I think that's the biggest hurdle.
Well, and boy, I hate saying this, Lefty's right about that. The Republicans have a great platform, I believe. We just don't ever tell people what it is in a coherent fashion, or we say it in such a way that it sounds like we're scary, right? We start talking about abortion, people get scared because of the way we talk about it. We start talking about traditional marriage, people get scared because of the way we talk about it. It's not clear. It's not coherent. It's just, like Lefty said, just a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, a lot of demonizing, and it's not going to do us any good. We have strong, powerful Republican advocates tearing each other apart, tearing each other down for no political gain. It's just ridiculous. So hey, Frank, you can have Lefty give me a pow on that one, because Lefty's absolutely right. It's an excellent observation about the problems between the Republican Party and why the Democratic Party have been so successful. We're going to be back right after these break. Stay tuned, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and DocandLefty.com.
On the whole, I think Washington, D.C. is a terrible place. It's hot, it's humid, kind of smells, and it's totally lacking individuals who know how to create jobs and live within their means. Hi, I'm Brad Zahn, and I approve this message. And I'm running for Congress because we owe it to future Iowans to fix the mess that was created in Washington, D.C. I've had real experience creating jobs, cutting taxes, and balancing budgets while mayor and in the state senate. If you trust me to represent you, I promise I'll go to Washington, D.C. and do the right thing, and come home every Sunday to spend time with my wife, my kids, and my neighbors here in Iowa. We cannot leave this country in worse shape than we found it. I will not pass this debt on to my children or yours. I will go to Washington, D.C. and tell them enough is enough. Standing together is the only way we're going to get Washington, D.C. to listen, and I hope you'll join me in this fight.
Brad Zahn for United States Congress.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're here. We got the final 10 minutes of the show, or give or take. And Doc, I was thinking about you today because I was in court on a matter this morning. It was a DHS case, but we don't have to. No implications of the DHS, but there was something else that kind of caught my attention. A couple of the other lawyers involved were talking about mental health, just briefly. And I know that you threw up an article about mental health care in Iowa and how really not very good it is. And their conversation caught my attention because I've dealt with similar issues with folks. And here's how the conversation went. This one lawyer was really angry with a provider in Southwest Iowa. I'm not going to say who it is, because they had kicked her client out of treatment for exhibiting basically what it comes down to is addictive behaviors. Wasn't turning his assignments in, was being manipulative with staff, was doing all these different things, and they kicked him out and discharged him unsuccessfully from treatment, which now turns out to be either a probation or parole revocation that she's fighting because he shouldn't have been kicked out in the first place. That's the argument. And as I'm listening to this, she wasn't going into a lot of detail, but what I kind of gleaned from her conversation was this guy was probably a dual diagnosis guy in a situation in a provider that has a reputation for being great with those kind of individuals. But how can you have a system where you exhibit the symptoms of addiction and get kicked out of the place that teaches you how to deal with the symptoms of addiction? And I want to bring that to your attention because you wrote this great piece about mental health and all the gaps in Iowa.
Well, the problem is it doesn't sound like this guy really wants treatment. I mean, I understand there's an addictive behavior and the rest of it, but the problem is if they're staff splitting, which is when you tell Frank exactly what I think of him, that's staff splitting, right? When you are using drugs during treatment, when you are harmful to other people in the treatment venue because of your behavior. That's different.
That's not
but harmful doesn't mean the direct harm. I don't think he was threatening anybody from what you said. Mm-hmm. But if his behavior is disruptive and puts other people's treatment at risk, that's something that's harmful. And that's why you terminate those people. You have to keep in mind, I will tell you, I've been the medical director of a lot of different places. And these substance abuse places, you know what you have to do to get kicked out? You virtually have to threaten God himself with death before they'll throw him out.
But that's
this guy, yeah. I mean, from what you've told me, these are the criteria that they use to throw him out, because it's obvious to me, just from what you've told me, he's not serious about his treatment. He's there because he doesn't want to go to jail.
I'm certainly not going to advocate for anybody that I don't directly know, but from what it sounded like to me were fairly spurious reasons for terminating on this guy. But I wonder if it doesn't show. I mean, there are cracks in the system all over the place. I mean, you have folks that are supposed to go and get treatment for a substance abuse issue that have an underlying mental health issue that's not diagnosed right away because the substance abuse folks don't do mental health. You have the same thing happen on the mental health side where there's, say, methamphetamine-induced paranoia, not schizophrenia necessarily, but severe mental health issues from prolonged use of a particular kind of drug. And I think, and it's always really difficult to deal with what the actual issue is. But I wonder if we had a better mental health system, are those the kinds of issues that could be effectively addressed, or is that just comes with the territory? Throw your hands up and do the best you can.
Well, most of these substance abuse facilities do have a psychiatrist on staff, mm-hmm. and they usually do go through a mental health evaluation. So the answer to your question is, yeah, if we have better mental health system, would this happen more frequently? Probably not. You could probably treat these offenders much sooner than what you do now, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of these guys get themselves looking at prison time, and then the judge says, you have to go to treatment. And he goes, great, as long as it's not prison. And the problem is a lot of these people, you have to lose everything before they're willing to start to do it.
That's absolutely true. And what I notice a lot of the times is that, there are a lot of folks who would, or not a lot of folks, but there are some folks who would rather go to prison. I dealt directly with a gentleman who was looking at probation revocation, and they were giving him the option. They were saying, hey, unless you do drug court, you are going to revoke your probation. You're going to go and do your 5 years in the pen. And I had a heck of a time convincing him that drug court would be a better option because it would keep you out of prison. They're giving you an out. They don't want to send you to prison. They want you to access some more services, access some more treatment. And this is a guy who admitted to his probation officer that he was using meth again, that he wasn't clean, that he wasn't living a sober lifestyle. And so you talk about folks that are not serious about their treatment. Isn't going to treatment a sign that they're serious about it? Isn't a guy that's saying, boy, even having the thought, boy, prison kind of sounds a little better than going to treatment. That's the guy who's not serious.
Well, but you have to keep in mind that, when I agree with what you just said. There are some people that have been institutionalized, right? And they don't want to be out in society. The problem is when they get a secondary gain from treatment, and that is their goal, as opposed to actual treatment and becoming sober, that's when it becomes harmful. Because this guy obviously had a secondary goal of, I want to stay out of prison. I don't want to go, but I don't want to change the behaviors that got me here. That's a problem. You have to get him into prison so he can sober up and say, hey, because a lot of these things, I mean, it's not like they're locked in a prison. They can come and go as they want, and they can go and use drugs. They can bring drugs back. That happens all the time. In fact, the saying is the best place to find drugs is at an NA meeting because it's voluntary.
Everybody's holding, yeah.
Everybody's holding. And don't get me wrong, you can get drugs into the prison system and all that other stuff. But the trick is there, it's a lot more difficult to get drugs into the prison system than it is out here in public. So you have to improve the entire system. The other thing I want to say is the chemical dependency people live in their own world with their own rules. Nobody else has a level of protection that the chemical dependency specialists do outside of lawyers. I mean, you cannot compel a lawyer to testify against his client, ever.
Right.
You cannot compel a chemical dependency counselor to testify against their client. But those are the only two groups of people I know where they are not compelled to testify. If I have to testify in front of the judge, I'm compelled to testify. I am compelled. I can't say, well, geez, I have patient-client privilege, because it doesn't hold up. Legally, it doesn't wash. So they live in their own world with their own set of rules.
Well, I have a feeling that if you were to assert doctor-patient confidentiality, you'd be able to get around that.
Well, I can tell you that on 2 different occasions, I was not, and was threatened with contempt of court for saying I have patient.
What was the reasoning? That's the first I've ever heard of it.
Well, this gal actually is heading up the federal branch now up in Cedar Rapids, whatever one that one is. And I don't know how she did it, but she did. I got threatened twice with contempt of court if I didn't answer the question that they asked of me, and I had stated, this is physician-patient privilege, and I don't feel comfortable answering the question. Well, answer the question, or you're going to face 90 days.
Yeah, that's just that. That's,
there you go.
That's
surprising
to me.
We're going to blog. At least I'm going to blog about the CIA thing. Apparently, you didn't want to talk about that in the last.
Oh, I forgot all about it.
Well, I said it right before we went on here.
I completely forgot all about it. But my 2 cents. Boy.
Well, write a blog about it because I'm sure we'll disagree. We're going to be back next week, same time, same place, with more information that you need to live your lives good. You doing anything this week?
Live your lives well.
Well.
Correcting your grammar. I'm going to start doing that from now on.
That's my new hobby. My God, my brother Joe does that.
I was talking to a friend of mine. He said I needed more hobbies other than just going to work and going home and sleeping. And I'm going to start policing your grammar from here on out. I think it's
good. Well, at least start policing your blog so we get a few on there. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We want to thank all of our sponsors. Brad Zahn for Congress, Bertrosian Associates, Lubinas Law Firm, Halo Capital, Des Moines Anesthesia PC. Am I forgetting anybody?
Boy, I don't
think I'm forgetting anybody. So. Anyway, thanks to everybody for tuning in. Don't forget to Facebook us, Twitter us, Bing us, because apparently we get binged now.
Oh, good.
And Google Plus us, along with visiting DocandLefty.com.
Check out the videos on YouTube.
Yep. See you, everybody, next week.
Goodbye.
Hi, I'm Representative Tom Shaw, and I love these guys. Both of them.
Love these guys. Get over here. Get over here. Love both of them.